You're tuned in to RX'D Radio.
It's insane.
But everything else is good. How was before we get into that? How was Summer Strong? So jealous.
It was good, and it was really strange. Probably 75% new faces, never been before.
What do you attribute that to?
I think the brand is growing. I think the branding of the company itself has changed. I think because the company has built itself, obviously, on the collegiate and professional weight room was one thing. But now I think they've gotten big enough and they have enough weight within the public sector that those people are actually curious now. They're like, oh, all our strength coaches, like the entire University of Florida strength staff was there. And not only were they there, they lifted and won all the lifting events.
Oh.
You know, so when you have that type of culture coming from one university, they influence so many people. You know, Tommy Moffitt, legend from LSU, spoke, right? And so when those guys are coming, I think it starts to attract a certain culture. And then you throw in some Rudy Reyes's, and you throw in maybe a Matt Vincent that pulls someone from somewhere, and you get this really eclectic mix of people that I think it's finally gotten to the point where people are like, oh shit, that's an event. It's not just a thing, right? And so with that, I think it's growing that way. And then I'll be honest, I think some of it is just the fact that people have been locked in their houses way too fucking long. And South Carolina and the southeast of the United States is like Freedom America, you know, Red Dawn. You know, you can go there and it's kind of normal. When I came back to California, it was a harsh kick in the nuts, man, because I hadn't left in 15 months.
Lundy, are we rolling? Because I want to start here. Because this is really what I want to talk to him about, is the coming back to reality. Just in the stories that I've heard that you've told me personally, and the stories I've heard from throughout your career, what you've done. And actually some of them have been through me watching your Summer Strong talks.
Right.
Like the coming back to reality. Like I've struggled with that. I haven't lived a real life in 4 months. Like dude, I'm in a country where I can't buy a coffee cup right now.
We should record this because I described my trip to Summer Strong in a very specific way. So if you're ready.
Yeah, no, we're rolling, man. We're rolling. For it.
So I didn't like going east. So for those that kind of have to catch up a little bit, I literally was on an international flight every 30 days for almost 10 years. And then I took 15 months where I did not step in an airport. Right? I went and flew in a Cessna to the recesses of the Sawtooth Mountain Range in Idaho last summer, but that was it. Like I went from nowhere to nowhere, right? So it was by no means a trip into society. But I've been living in the bubble of Mammoth Lakes, which is uber liberal. And I don't say that bad. I don't mean to rub anyone the wrong way, but it's uber liberal in their mindset. They have a very aggressive methodology in terms of how they socially have dealt with the pandemic, meaning which our town is like 90% vaccinated. Our town is still 100% masks in cars by themselves. So there's a psychology there that doesn't make sense to a scientific mind, okay? And people will be like, oh, they're just looking out for shedding. Shedding an mRNA viral inoculation that doesn't shed, right? No, just stop listening to bullshit. So, you know, and now if they got Johnson & Johnson, maybe I'll have an argument about adenovirus technology. But when you're talking about nanotechnology, it's not shedding. It's not shedding anywhere, right? It's shedding in their mind. Their brain is broken, right? And so what everyone talks about up here is it's like, yeah, but it's for the greater good. No, you're hiding. I saw a guy yesterday walking by himself, middle of nowhere. He had a mask that covered to the bottom of his eyes. He had a ball cap pulled down as low as you could pull it, sunglasses on, and AirPods in. I mean, talk about prey, if there ever was a physical representation of someone completely oblivious to the real world, right? And two, he's hiding from something. That guy's hiding. He's not... I don't even know if he's afraid. He's just realized it's easier to be that way than to be himself. But I digress. So I come from this like super extreme mentality bubble where they were just basically, they got it crushed. You know, a guy who is the head of our health and wellness in the entire county was a former HIV subordinate under Fauci 15, 20 years ago, right? So you can get into all that weird stuff if you want to, but that's just some real information. And so I left this place having, you know, basically I hadn't seen, other than Megan in my own house or her godmother, maybe 2 or 3 people in 12 months have I seen a face that wasn't on social media or the television. And that's not a fabrication. I mean, I skied 95 days this year and they were aggressive on the mountain about masking. They're aggressive in every business. So for me, going, you know, north to catch the plane in Reno, I was kind of not sure what to expect, you know. I'd been up to Reno a couple times or up to Carson City, and they were still pretty strict back then. And so my trip was just after the president came out and announced that fully vaccinated people didn't have to wear masks, which what that really means is don't ask me, I'm not wearing a mask, right? Like, so even people that aren't vaccinated, they don't have to wear a mask with that type of, you know, announcement. You know, it's just logic, right? And so when I hit the Nevada state line, everything changed. All of a sudden, like on the Chipotle, there were signs that say you didn't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated, etc. And so immediately I'm out, right? Because I was a guy that was like putting on his mask at the threshold of every store door, you know, like I couldn't get used to it. It's not normal to me. Even working in the Middle East forever, it's just that it's irrelevant. So when I hit Nevada, I was like, oh, this is weird. And it's like every step of that trip until I got to South Carolina at Summer Strong, you could feel like this tension and this psychological burden, like just kind of get less and less and less. And by the time I got to South Carolina and I got off the plane and got through like the TSA final exit check, there was no one wearing masks. And when I say that, I don't say it was 100% no masks, but you could see it was people that were making a conscious choice based on probably information. Like there was probably still some radical mindsets that were hiding from the world, but for the most part, you could see it was elderly and people that, for lack of a better description, maybe should wear a mask if they're not vaccinated. Like there was something going on with them, either, you know, extreme obesity, maybe some sort of other health looking ailment. They wore masks. And then, of course, you go into Chipotle out in Lexington or Columbia, and all the staff has to wear it, right? Because they don't want to get their ass suit off. But they're not telling you to wear it. And they're never even acknowledging it. Like, this is true. Here in California, if I try to go maskless into a business, every single person looks at you. They give you the side eye. They kind of take a step back, or they will completely go around an aisle to get away from you. Right? But I go into a restaurant 5 minutes later, there's not a mask on and everybody is literally 6 feet apart. Okay, so you can see this is not logical thinking. This is emotional broken psychology here. And I'm going to ask you guys about Canada in a second because my parents still live there, but they live in the woods. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different. So when I got out to South Carolina, we had 700 attendees. Big, massive barbecue, live music, beer gardens, a festival. Nobody. And I mean, people came from all over the country. There was not a single mask worn at that event. No one's coughing, no one's sneezing. Huge gatherings of weightlifting on the platform where like 200 people are cheering on a coach from one big university. He's pulling 700 or whatever it is, right? And so I went through that entire experience where I was like inundated by like the social connection of body language, facial expression. Like I felt like a guy that had so much to say all the time because I was like trying to catch up, right? But at the same time, totally blown out. And finally on day 2, I said to Bert, you know, and I think Rudy Reyes, I mentioned it to him. I go, I now know what I feel like. I go, I've been all over the road with this. I feel like Tommy Lee Jones's character from the movie Hunted when they force him to come out of the woods and go catch Del Toro. Like you're able to adjust to society, but at the same time, everything's like turned up to 11. Like you notice everything, people's energy, like just the fact that all of a sudden your brain starts to recognize facial characteristic of conversation and facial interaction without voice is like literally somebody just putting another dial of depth into every conversation you're going to have that day. Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm super aware of how they just moved with their face. Because for a year, I've only had to acknowledge or translate like a handful of faces. That's it. Like I don't have to read that language right now. And now all of a sudden I'm having to read it everywhere. My brain is going to do it if I'm not aware of it or not, because that is our base level communication is body language. So all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, my body language ability to decipher is like a superpower right now. Like I feel like I'm the most empathetic human on the planet because I can see it all. And then it was weird to kind of get that to like cool down. And when I finally got back and comfortable again, it was like just weight. There was so much weight loss, right? And I'm like, God damn, this is incredible. And then I had to come back to California. And when I hit California, and you kind of get like doctorated to it because the airplane makes you put your mask on, and unless you're eating and poisoning everybody, right? So, it's just such a crazy mentality. And so I get back to California, and this is like May 24th, right? And I see the announcement on my phone. California, under further review, rolls mask mandate back until June 15th, and then they will reevaluate. Reevaluate what? Like, what are they doing? And then about 4 days later, the governor announces that they're doing a vaccination lotto, and that you could win up to $15 million if they randomly pull your name as a vaccinated candidate. It's all lies, right? And so I get back up into the mountains. There's 20,000 dirtbag tourists shitting in the woods and fucking dumping their trash on the street, not giving a shit, but they got their masks on, right? Like, how broken of a psychology could you create? Like if there was an experiment and it was called Let's Fuck Up California, but it's going to take 15 months, they just pulled it off.
Well, it's crazy to me because to hear you kind of dissect in the previous podcast and in other podcasts where we spoke about your career, like, if you guys aren't familiar with Derek's past and what he's done in the strength community, and I still to this day will cite you as a person who's taken the barbell further than any person on the planet. I want to get into the jewel thief story at some point today. Yeah. But like to hear you talk about going back and forth from the Middle East to Canada or California, just the United States, like the West to the East, and have that be something, the airport, there's an IED explosion that goes off, all of the glass is tremoring, pilot goes, everyone good, got fingers and toes, all right, let's get this bitch in the air. And then that was a lesser debrief, or seemed like a lesser acclimation period of going from east to west under that experience than like having to deal with, going from Freedom, South Carolina to Karen County, California. It's just like, it's crazy to me because I think there's two types of people coming out of the pandemic. There's ones who had like a self-awareness and then therefore an awareness of others, who are like what you said, like a hyper aware. Like for 15 months, I had to know what it was like for someone to be smiling or frowning just by looking at their eyes. Right. Correct. And like, it's crazy to me. I remember studying psychology early in my undergrad and just like some bullshit throwaway elective course. And they talked about the inability over time through generations for people to unable or not be able to accurately identify emotions based off of someone's eyes. Right. Like they showed kids, and this is probably like the early 90s when the study was happening, but they would show people's just pictures of people's eyes, and kids would be like, I don't know, is he hungry? Is he sad? Is he pinching one off? Like, I have no idea what these eyes are. But if you paid attention up till that point, now it's like you said, like this superpower. And it sort of shows you like how much of our communication is nonverbal and how much of our like sanity is now grounded in human interaction. Because some people, like once they were so far and or so far afield that just tipping the scale a little bit further, and it's like they're completely oblivious to themselves and others. So like because I've seen it on both ends. Like here in Canada, there are people who, they take the masks off and they're like, wow, like I lived down in like a fairly popular part of like the small, Burlington. And so there's a bunch of people out for like the long weekend, the May 2-4 weekend. And have you ever seen the movie or read the book, The Giver?
Where
No.
everything's in black and white, then it goes to color.
Right. So the whole book goes through. I think it was Josh Brolin was in the movie. Whole book goes on, and you don't really know what the character is missing, what they're referring to, but you realize that at the end, what this giver character gives to the young sort of protagonist of the story is the ability to see color. Right. And that was what's been missing this entire time. Everyone in this world can't see color, but there's these two people now can. And like, that's what it is. Like, people who are self-aware or were self-aware now have a heightened sense of awareness. And it's like,
Right.
you walk around, you're like, oh my God, like there's so much to see. But then you see other people who are still, and you know, those who might not have like the predisposing maladies that would, you know, like, hey, maybe you should wear a mask. But that are just so unaware of themselves and therefore their environment. It's like they're just completely, like, it's completely fractionated, like at least what I've seen.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I live, like you, Woodske, like I live in a pretty liberal area. Like, I live in close to the Parkdale area of downtown Toronto. So it's like, very much it's very much like, I would say, they're on the left. They're very creative. They're very pro a lot of issues. But what I've seen actually over the course of whatever long we've been locked down, 18 months, is the transition of viewpoints and opinions based on the fact that most of the people I know own their own business in this neighborhood.
Right.
So, and that's where I see a divide in the weaponization of the pandemic versus the logical minds, right? Like, we could see a weaponization of the left to the right with identifying those who don't wear masks or those who wear masks as on one polarity of this political spectrum. But on the other side of this spectrum are people who have a vested interest in their own self-preservation outside of what the possible pandemic health crisis could be. Because I see people that I know who will stand up for any issue, except for the fact that their business has been closed for 18 months and they're a little bit over the mask thing now.
Yep. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with that comment, because there's a survivability factor that we are seeing in California. So, like Jordan obviously lived here at one time. Mm-hmm. The state itself is extremely liberal politically and liberal leaning. And so it's so funny to use these terms, because I always just think of it as just a more complex concept. But like, liberalism is not what the media is telling us right now, right? Like, and nor is conservatism. It's too connected now with political parties, and it's a really frustrating thing for me, who's always been kind of what you would consider to be a slightly right-leaning Canadian, which means I'm pretty socially left-leaning American.
Right.
Yeah,
Classic
you'll always be on the left side of the States, coming from Canada.
Yeah, and so it's like, I got a lot of guns, I do a lot of stuff like that, but that has nothing to do with being a liberal or a conservative. No. And that's where it gets very clouded here, right? It has to do with personal freedom and choice. So I have to a lot of times try to down here, like, identify as being an independent, and I'm not a libertarian, because I don't believe, like, it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is you get in this muddled conversation of what's really happening, and what people are failing to realize, that a virus, for all intents and purposes, that kills a certain demographic a lot more than other demographics, so if you got some health issues, or you're older, it's a troublesome deal that we got going on here. So instead of just looking at it as a matter of fact, like, we got this weird thing that, was really well engineered by some people that either may or may not have set it free into the universe, has basically killed millions. And if you wanted to argue and say, okay, maybe they fluffed the statistics, it's killed tens, if not hundreds of thousands, okay? So you have that conversation. That's a real conversation. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that something weird has been making people sick this year. And with that being said, like, I can go back 15 months ago, and I found a story on Instagram, like a year ago, March. And with no prompting, I was just like, well, we don't really know what's going on right now, but I keep a mask in my pocket in case I'm around old people. Like, I kind of just gave this like little PSA of like, maybe you should have a mask if there's a bunch of old people around you don't feel well. And my exact words, I think, were, I think I'll be okay, but I don't know about them. Right now, we jump ahead all these months later, and we're having a conversation that if you're liberal, you wear a mask, and if you're Republican, you don't.
Yeah.
Like, how did we devolve to it being that simple? And now it's devolved even more. If you're a conservative, you don't get a vaccine.
Yeah.
Right? Because now conservatives somehow don't get sick. Right? And then on the other side of it, you got a weird split in the political liberal party. You either have those that ran out and got vaccinated right away because they were doing their, due diligence in their mind, or, and these are my favorite, anti-vax pro-mask. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, choose a side. Figure this out.
Yeah, the math doesn't add up on that one.
The way
it doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. The way I look at it, like in what you were saying, it's so odd. I think especially more so in Canada's becoming more, I feel, Americanized in its political interpretations now. But
yeah.
I view what's happened over the last year and so very much like, obviously none of us would remember, but we know about it is, do you remember the old propaganda posters from World War II?
Very well.
And they had the very cartoonish interpretations of what the axis of evil looks like. And they were always like universal monstrified, you know what I mean? Like people would have long nails and fangs like a vampire. They'd be biting into places in the world. And I feel we have identified opposing views in these cartoonish caricature-like ways where we're just trying to find ways of identifying them. It's if I can visually identify this person as this now, I know who my friends are, I know who my friends aren't, and I have an easier image to paint of the enemy, because at the end of the day, the enemy for the most part is invisible, right? Like, I think if 1984 proved anything, the greatest enemy is your friend. It's not the one who's obviously the enemy.
Correct.
But that's my thing.
Well, yeah, I just think like, and this is where I don't necessarily like, and this is a recent revelation I've had, is like, I don't like when people haphazardly make the comparisons to the early 1940s in Germany. And
it doesn't make any sense.
Well, no, like, but it's a false equivalency to say, like, and it's absolutely true, right? Like the mask and the no mask is the identifier of political allegiance in the United States. And you can see it state by state, right? Like I was in Florida, they're just tossing those in the propeller of the fan boats, like sayonara, see you later.
Right.
But and people try and make this thing of like, oh, it's mask now and then it's armbands later. It's like, I don't know if you've read the same history books I've read, man. Like, I think it's a different landscape now, and I take exception to people because I don't wear masks in my building. I have respectful conversations as to why I don't. If someone's looks like they might want to get in the elevator and they need it more than I do, I'll just take the stairs. I don't really care. But at the same time, it's like to take it to that, that point in history and try and make that equivalency into that. And I totally agree with the propaganda. And I just think that's the cyclical behavior of like human nature. Because I see it as, especially in Canada right now with where we're at, we're always behind the States, right? We're always behind the States. And I see like Trudeau is like our Obama, and it's giving us liberal moral licensing. Right. And then the reverberation, the antidote to the Obama, once we had this moral licensing of an 8 years African-American president, now it was like, all right, we good. Everyone can kind of say, hey, we're over the whole thing, the 400 years and all. And then obviously there's still like substantial social issues that stem from slavery. But I feel like that gave America a sense of moral licensing to maybe lean more to the conservative right wing side, where Canada now is gone so far left that I see a pendulum swing coming back to the right. And in the same way the America had a pendulum swing post Obama era after this period of 8 years of moral licensing, I think Trudeau has gone far and above, and I don't know if above is the right way to sort of give a vector to this, but far beyond liberalism, right? Like he's completely lost his mind.
It is, and I think it's a fair comparison. So when I look at it this way, so everybody in Canada, and obviously my parents were Harper generation, right? Mm-hmm. So that was my dad's guy. So we were conservative Canadians. Logging town in BC, you do the math, right? So when you start to look at it that way, everyone thought Harper was so conservative. And comparatively, Harper be a lot like George W., right? Now, all of a sudden, it's amazing how people, even if you were a conservative that voted Trump, there was a lot of people that were like, man, I kind of wish we had George W. around, because he was so much softer to deal with, because he was so much more stately. As much as they made fun of him for all of his little Texas quirks, he was still more stately than Trump ever was. And when you look at like Trudeau compared to Obama, it's the same type of adjustment, right? Like Trudeau followed what Canadians felt was an extremely dictatorship-based conservative government. And it's like, well, maybe not so much. Like when you do the statistical math of an Obama as president, he would have been significantly different as a Canadian prime minister. Like Obama as prime minister would be right of Harper. And that's a hard thing for Canadians to wrap their head around, right? But he's so left of what's conservative in the United States. And so when you think of that, like, you know, for all of Harper's faults, you know, he wasn't the leading drone strike world leader like Obama was. Like, can you imagine Canadians having a prime minister that dropped the most drone strikes in history on foreign soil? Like, blow their mind, right? Well, still somehow being the most liberal president in the last 30 years, other than Sleepy Joe, right? Which is a whole nother conversation of, you know, elder abuse. But with that being with that being said, it's kind of crazy to have those thoughts. And like Jordan said, like drawing the connection to, you know, early 19th century or early 1900s history is really difficult. So like a lot of people never think, but my uncle married an immigrant German Jew. And so, what is going on? That was weird. And she came over and learned how to speak English in a Canadian logging camp. So we always laughed because she spoke with like a ton of profanity, right? But that's how she learned to speak English. She learned to speak English listening to British Columbia loggers, right? And, you know, but we never spoke about what she lived through. Like growing up as a kid, we never even thought about it. Like, I'll be honest, I knew she was German because she would swear at us in German, but she never talked about the fact that she was a Jewish immigrant from Germany. And it wasn't until I was an adult where I did the math and I was like, oh, hold on a second. Auntie Rainey lived through some shit. Like, there's a reason why she is the only member of her family that ever ended up in Canada as a female at 17. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And so when people talk about, you know, having to wear a mask into Chipotle, or the fact that the divisiveness of pandemic methodology is equivalent to, you know, trying to eradicate a race from the planet, you're a fucking piece of shit if that's your if that's your mindset, right? Because it's gross. It's gross. It's gross, and it's uneducated, and you're ignorant, right?
Well, it's just like, you know, I understand slippery slopes. Like, I get the idea, and like, and large in part, some of the regulation that we've accepted is of a consequence of small steps at a time, right? Like, what's his name? I'm blanking on the book, but anyways, but there's directions to that these slopes can go down, right? Like, you know, it's not all of a sudden, you know, one succumbing to a legislative action that inhibits and just transiently something that you dictate a right or a freedom doesn't necessarily mean that, well, they're coming for our guns next, and then there go the Jewish people. It's like, whoa, hey now, like that's a little bit of a misguided thought process.
No, and I agree 100%. And it's been a difficult thing to live through in terms of how the mindset's broken. And obviously, you guys living up north, you've probably been watching a little bit with like an elevated position in terms of not having to deal with it. But just look at the amount of chaos that this country's gone through this year. In terms of the U.S., like the amount of horrific rioting, the amount of, you know, you look at Portland and Seattle and like the Chaz and the violence and the destruction of town centers, that hasn't stopped. It just isn't something that is making the media right now because it's not a story that has an agenda that they can manipulate. But, you know, I got a buddy that is a police officer in Portland every day. Every day it's a problem. they're still dealing with all sorts of issues with this separatist mindset that has developed with, whatever it is, Antifa or whatever group of, uber anti societal mindsets. It's these people, and I don't know what the stimulus for this is. I don't know what's driving it. Like, people want to say it's inequality in some senses, both financially or racially or these things. But when you look at the way that they're dealing with it, it doesn't always add up. Because if it was those things in particular, then you could see that they would probably have an agenda where they were trying to reestablish some sort of hierarchy so that they could get the things in which they don't have. But to me, it just seems more like anarchy, right? Like, they've been playing so much Fortnite that they just have to get out of the house and tear some shit up.
Yeah, it's
right?
not like they're trying to topple it over so they can be at the top. They want to topple it over so everyone can be at the bottom. Right? What's that quote about? Like, it's an Orwell quote. What is it? They don't hate the rich. They just despise the poor. Is that an Orwell quote?
Maybe something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's more to the point
It's a good
of, like,
quote regardless.
Like,
Yeah, it's your quote now.
There you go. Own it. That's how
Take
Instagram
it.
works. I also going to name a bunch of exercises with my last name in front of
Yeah.
it. That's how the
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
It does seem to be baseless. It's like the guy holding up the bank vault and then is like, well, what do you want? And then he just comes up with, I want to talk to the president and I want $1 million and a helicopter. It's like, you really didn't think this through, did you? There's not much foresight going into this plan.
No, and that's exactly it. And so I think, everyone's talking about massive inflation in the U.S., which means global economic shit show, right?
Mm-hmm.
People always try to separate the two. What did I see recently? I saw a news outline that said, if the United States continues to pursue the COVID spread as a man-made Chinese virus, that China is threatening nuclear retaliation, right? And it's like, really? Like, you're going to blow up the thing that makes you all the money? Like, there's such a broken mindset down here where they'll believe anything. So, a bunch of Republicans, and conservative guys are going to read that and be like, holy shit, China's going to nuke us. Really? You really think that? They're going to try to completely cripple us economically, maybe, so we have to be dependent on buying everything that they produce. Because the one thing that the U.S. is a massive consumer of everything. So you think they're just going to eradicate an entire financial system that they depend on? Like, it's just, people have lost the plot. It's bizarre to me.
I mean, to me, it's just, I think it stems from, like, no direction, no purpose, I mean, I don't know, the lack of, I don't know if entertainment's the right word.
Well, I think you're not on the wrong track with saying the lack of entertainment, right? Because if we think of, like, pre-pandemic, I don't think the decentralization of entertainment or media had truly happened as much as it's happened since. And people were still watching, like, fictional TV shows. But now, you can even look at this from a very pedestrian economic argument. If people can't afford the streaming services they maybe have once watched, how many people don't even own a television? I know a ton of people in Toronto just have a laptop. For the most part, these people are getting their entertainment from their phone, and the slide between YouTube and going down some loose change rabbit hole or opening up Instagram and scrolling through an explore page curated to show you your views by your views. And that's like, I mentioned Dan Carlin to you yesterday. He was developing a website called Your Views by Your Views, but to show you the polarity in the media, in which there would be a slider that you could slide to the left and read only left news. And then you could slide to the right, read the same news articles, but from a right-wing news establishment. And then you could slide to the middle and see both.
Well, I think the hard part with that is you're getting positively reinforced for like being a part of it. Right? Like, you're a part of, like, Gary Vee and I fucking hate Gary Vee. But
you don't have to reference him.
Right? He talked about this idea of a tokenized economy, or like a tokenized membership, where companies are foregoing a certain amount of equity in their company to really be like, it's like essentially Canadian Tire money.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like, here, we're going to give you things to transact within our company for being a part of our company. Now they're doing this with people's attention, right? They're tokenizing these communities under giving positive reinforcement, like going to a casino, right? So your behavior and your action on these platforms is being, positively reinforced with, a currency that has been made up by the platform themselves to keep you in the platform. And I see it indirectly with larger social media platforms that don't realize they're doing it in the currency of likes and shares and subscribers. Like, how many times during the Black Lives Matter movement did you see some, couldn't give a fuck fitness chick? And, I could name a handful off, the top of my head that we all probably know, repping the bandana and the BLM with the old Jesse Norris fist in the air. It's like but it's because they were collecting the currency of the platform in which because if that girl gets more followers, next time she puts up an ebook, that's a higher percent of conversions that she's going to make. So she's actually able to extract value and be positively reinforced through giving her attention to these issues, and then be given the social currency as a thank you, as a congratulations. And that's where it's dangerous, is like you're weaponizing morality.
Yeah, well, like if we go back to like Thomas Hobbes, which you and I have talked about before, and even to if we go Thomas Hobbes on the potential right and we get Michel Foucault on the potential left, they both talked of this idea that a sovereign state's strength is within the belief of the people to protect that the sovereign state will protect the people. So your government is only as strong as the belief that the people have that the government protects them. Well, people have seen the government lose its overwhelming power in a state that we don't exist in a physical world, we exist in a digital world. So the sovereign state has switched to the platform, and the platform is as powerful as people's belief in it. So people believe they need to protect the platform in order to protect themselves.
Right.
So their usage of the platform to post a Black Lives Matter or whatever they deem their post to be. And it could also be a don't get vaccinated story that's kind of useless. Like, you don't need to post that story every day. But it's in their belief that this is now the new sovereign body that protects their identity. Therefore, they must protect the sovereign body, which is an app or a establishment.
Right. Well, dude, even predating Foucault and Hobbes, the state of Israel, right? Like, there's a flood coming, because that was the idea, was to ascend to make perfect the sovereign state of Israel. Then everyone just got fucking walloped again and again and again. So it's and it just further proves something that we've talked about, or at least, buys into this idea that, after the death of, like, the proclamation of the death of God, like, the new religion is really the social media. Like, that's the new church and state in a way, right? Like, the idea that the biggest government right now is not, the U.S. government. Like, it's Facebook. Yep. It's Facebook and Instagram. These are parallel governments, right? We saw this in the last election, right, with Trump, and the whole idea that, like, the Russia buying sponsored ads and all that shit, which I think was actually proven to be true. So it's like right now we have a re-emerging, or like a realignment of church and state just under a single entity of these social media platforms.
Well, I think that's an identifying church and state and conglomeration as different, right? But all are the same. And I think we look from a bottoms up point of view. Like, most people look that they are below a government, that they are below a religion. There's a God above them. But if in understanding, it's really a top down approach to all these things have a power that you've assigned to them. Like, Henry David Thoreau moved to a shed in the woods, didn't pay his taxes.
Right.
You don't have to. Like, essentially, maybe you do because there's a consequence, but you as a figurative man, as a person, as an embodiment of something, do not have to do anything. Just don't do it. But we've decided on a bottoms up approach to understanding authority, which can come by whatever name or discretion we believe it has.
Well, it's funny because bringing up Thoreau, that brings, like, there's a quote that I've been thinking about since the pandemic started, and kind of to the point of, like, people going up in arms and occupying Chaz and doing all this crazy bullshit. And I thought about Walden and the civil disobedience, and the quote in that book is, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. And it's like, that's what I'm seeing when people are, there was a day if you saw a guy in a parking lot with a mask up to his eyes, sunglasses on, and a hat, it's like, yo, he's going to go knock off the bank. Now this guy's trying to just get through life unseen. And it's like, that to me is when I see that in action, it's like, I think of that quote, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation.
17 months ago, so as a concealed carry in the state of California and concealed carry in like 35 states, until 17 months ago, it was illegal to be masked and conceal carry my handgun into any business in America. Based on pandemic stipulations, I break federal law every single day I go to my grocery store. Right? How can that, like, so that's just a thing. It's not real. And so what's happening is it's making people become aware of the fact that a lot of the rules in which we live under aren't real.
Correct.
Right? So this like masked gun can't go into a store federal law rule now all of a sudden doesn't exist. It's been totally eradicated by the fact that we have this bigger opposing threat, which is a pandemic. Well, then my argument is, well, how do we know this isn't just a trial run for getting people used to adjusting to things very, very quickly and in a very dramatic way, and where they can manipulate rule when they need to or when they want to based on their own necessity? And who's to say it is the government that is even imposing this? Because as of right now, it's not the government in the real bigger scheme of the federal government that's telling me I have to wear a mask in my town. It is this culture or societal belief here in California that we are still doing the greater good by covering our faces in this time of hardship. Even though our actual federal government, who's supposed to be driven or organized by really good science, is telling us, no, that's not the case. You don't have to if you follow these criteria. And then that brings up the argument, well, if you follow these criteria, you get to live a free life that no longer has the constraint of all these other rules, right? So you're now a member of the chosen few, the morally correct. What I think kind of caught them off guard is the fact that a lot of people don't like vaccinations, regardless of their political leaning. And so now they got a conundrum. Oh, shit, all the people in California didn't run out and get vaccinated? Well, what do? The oldest American adage, we'll offer them a shitload of possible money. Right? And all of a sudden people are like, yeah, I'm going to vaccinate. Throw me in the pool of the 15 millionaires that are going to come out in the next year, And so when you look at all this like mindset, I think it was, regardless of how this virus started and regardless of the fact that it more than likely was created by somebody, either released by mistake or accident, it's irrelevant at this point, right? It's like, pregnant's pregnant, right? So when you look at it, that way, it's kind of crazy that here we are, because people are still trying to wrap their head around where we are, and no one's asking questions like how many people were platformed this year for saying that the Wuhan lab created this issue, like completely erased from social media, which, depending on who they were and how much money social media made them, they basically destroyed their businesses. Like, it'd be like in a physical, the technological world's so fucked because people don't see the consequence. It's like dropping a bomb on a city, right? Like, it's like the pilot's like, yeah, I killed some people. Well, who'd you kill? It was a smoke cloud. Now you go talk to a sniper, or if you have friends that were in special ops that were snipers, those guys carry a different type of weight, right? And they struggle with it sometimes. And so when you compare the digital to the practical, the digital world's the guy dropping a drone from Nevada, right? Like, so he's flying this little thing in a box and shooting things out of the sky. The real world is the sniper. So Facebook comes along and completely eradicates a business doing $20,000 a month in revenue for somebody, and has completely destroyed them because they deplatformed them for an ideology or a belief that they were questioning. Could you imagine that if you had a business that was a coffee shop in Pennsylvania, and one day you wrote on your chalkboard out front, I think the virus was created in a lab, and like 3 days later, this entity of social support comes by and literally burns your business to the ground, and then tells you you can never own a coffee shop again as long as you live. That is the correlating mindset that we're dealing with, but people don't realize it. Like businesses, so many businesses were destroyed in a digital world. They dropped the bomb from space.
Well, I think you said that the policymakers and the legislators weren't ready for, people's maybe aversion to vaccinations. I think they didn't equate for the sway that can be had outside of the realm of political influence, right? Like that the term influencer now probably has because it is extremely influential. Like if you follow someone who is, maybe not for their political bias, but you follow them for their health and fitness, right? Which is kind of like our industry. And someone in a health and fitness capacity says something about anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine, that can have a lot of sway, right? And that's where it's like it becomes really interesting. And it's funny to me because we talk about the separation of church and state, and we see other countries who might not be going through the same issues as the United States are in the divisiveness. Like, and we were talking about this earlier, the idea that, there's in the States, especially with there's such a strong national identity, there is no single purveyor or house that carries the identity in its entirety, right? Where you look at someone like the UK, or really the majority of the most livable countries in the world are still under a constitutional monarchy, right? So the idea that's a prime minister or an elected official has not ascended or risen to this head of church or head of state position, that there's still someone who carries with it the traditions and that national identity, where that seems to have fractionated into this like this Horus type Mesopotamian myth into 1,000 pieces and built together through a bunch of people with their own captive audiences, and all of which can sway influence in a similar fashion over someone's life, where prior that influence could only really be held by political party.
100%. I kind of cash my chips in on like listening to, even outside the election and all that stuff, like you could see all the divisiveness. But what cashed my chips in on this whole deal was about 12 months ago. A friend of mine had a company reach out to them and was offering to pay them $2,500 a month to be a pro-mask social media presence. And when that happened, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is bullshit. This is, you got to be kidding me. And it was kind of like, the way that an advertising company would do anything. It'd be like, Michelob Ultra paying all these fitness people right now to have beer in their commercials.
Kenny Santucci, you piece of shit. Every time I see Kenny drinking a Michelob, it's like, potato.
And you know what was funny is when I found out about the Michelob advertisement campaign, I was like, lucky bastards, right? And then all of a sudden I was like just scrolling through random unrelated, fitness people that you would have no correlation. And I'm like, oh, wow.
They got you too.
They're all they got them all. Like they got them all. And so, and it's so, if you didn't know, you didn't know. You just be like, oh man, these healthy people like Michelob Ultra, right? And or not healthy, whatever. But it's like, and so when I saw this with the masking in California, I was like, it's the same shit, right? And you just slide it in. And we saw it, like, Jordan, you said earlier with the fitness industry, all this flag waving social morality, right? And you're just like, I know you in real life, you sniff coke and fuck every weekend with strangers, and you want me to believe your moral lessons?
Yeah, I want to hear the story of two. You better be wearing two domers too.
Right? Like, holy shit. Like, we know who you are. We know what you are, but other people don't. And that's kind of how it's always been. Like, I used to live in Cleveland, right? I used to work in pro sports with a young LeBron James. I know what he was like in his younger years. He was a rascal, right? And now we're supposed to take morality advice from that guy because he's worth hundreds of millions and trillions of views. It's like, no, I can't. I can't because he's a rascal. I know what he was like. He's, my friends used to party with him. So when I look at all these different things, it's hard for me to buy into the social media juggernaut, even though I love to use it to reach people. And I think for me, that's always been an issue I've struggled with. How do I be available through this technology, which is miraculous, but how do I decipher so I don't get pulled into a rabbit hole and you don't see me, wearing a mask in a weightlifting video next weekend being like, oh shit, he just paid 3 months rent, right?
Well, yeah, it's hard, right? Because there's no difference between, the only difference is the person writing the check, because now there's no difference between marketing and lobbying. Right, marketing and lobbying is the same thing. In the mask issue, it's merely marketing a political agenda. No different than a Michelob Ultra is like how we know conventionally marketing a product. Right, you're lobbying to people who maybe don't even realize the ramifications that they have, because they're the fractionated disbursement of the collective ideal of the nation itself. Right, where it's we have the Queen. Boris is still got to take his dumb haircut and walk over to the fucking the castle and be like, "Oi, ma'am, yes, hello. Oh, I'm very sorry," and like explain yourself to grandma up the hill, right? Where it's like we don't have that anymore. So everything's like was crazy ass Wild West, and people don't understand, I think, the reverberations of their action. Like and even the language is crazy. To have a following is insane, right? That's language used in religion, like followers. It's like I would just love Instagram to just change it to disciples. Just one day be like, how many hundreds of thousands of disciples does The Rock have now? And then maybe people would get it.
That's a funny way to look at it, because when you look at the evolution of sociology, right? So you have cult, sect, religion, right? And when you break down a lot of the development of religion over time, that's kind of how people describe it in scientific terms, right? A cult leader becomes a sect leader, becomes a religious leader. And so every religion, major religion in history, has had that happen. It all happened prior to social media, but it's no different. So you ask me 1,000 years from now, what's the name of the religion that everybody's praying to in the West? Who is that? Who is the prophet? Who is the prophet Dwayne Johnson 1,000 years from now? Because an argument could be made. I mean, if Jesus was a man that literally walked the earth as a prophet, he had a shitload less followers than The Rock has.
Yeah.
Right. So like when you really stop and think about that, and now granted that there has to be some sort of agenda that's tied to it, and stories have to be told where miraculous tales that can't be quantified have to exist to create that deity like stature. Right. So, if like 15 guys sitting around are like, yeah, man, that Jesus. Right. Did you see what he did that day? And it's just like this story that becomes a thing that becomes a fabrication maybe, or maybe he really did turn water into wine because, he has good technology and figured out how to make booze before everybody else. But regardless of the fact, when you look at it that simply, that's all it's going to take. All it's going to take is somebody that is a little bit different. Like, we talked about this last time. But why are not more people concerned about weird shit flying in the sky right now? Like, how is that not a thing that, like, even I find myself like, why am I not more interested in this? Because we're being bombarded by distractions right now. Like last time I was on the pod, we talked about this because that dude in the desert gave me all those videos of weird flying shit, which is now the same stuff that is on Fox News. Literally the same videos that this guy's been filming in Death Valley. Now here's where it gets weird. The NSA. So getting ready for this podcast, I was like, oh shit, I have that text thread with Jordan with all those UFO videos in it, right? I'm like, so I just pull it up to see. They're all gone.
Shut the fuck up.
They erased them off. Yes, dude. They're all little gray blank squares on my phone. And then I'm like, well, this doesn't make sense. So I go into my saved photos and videos. Gone. Erased off my phone. All of the images that I sent you no longer exist. So I'm like, this is a mess. So I go to my buddy, Danilo, who took the video, the photographer, and I'm like, hey man, check this out. And I show him my phone. And he's like, oh, yeah. He's got a really good accent. But he goes, yeah, same, man. He goes, they're all gone. He goes, if I hadn't have saved those images onto a portable hard drive, all my technology, all the filming I've ever done, it's all gone.
I'm going to have to go back and find our thread and see if mine are still there. That's fucking terrifying.
Crazy. It's terrifying. And so full disclosure, like I got vaccinated. I was really worried I couldn't get across the border to see my old man, which I don't know if I need it to cross the border yet with all the shit that's going on. So for me, I made that decision, right? And I was like, and I sometimes I struggle with it. I'm not going to lie. Like there's days where I'm like, I hope I'm okay, right? Like it's what I think about. But, for me, I was more worried about something other than that. But with that being said, everybody's like, yeah, but what about? And they always come back to the nanotechnology heresy, right? And you're just like, fuck, dude. Do you realize how trackable you are with your technology that you never set down? Like, as someone that spent a lot of time overseas, working in countries where I was constantly monitored by the government, both our own and abroad, there is nothing that you can hide from. There's nothing. And if they needed to find you and you were using the best RFI and, EMP preventative technologies on the planet, you know what they do? They send a dude, a guy. A guy comes and looks for you and then watches you with his fucking eyes. That's what they do. Because that never stopped. They just know they don't have to do it all the time anymore because you got a cell phone in your pocket. They just listen. This conversation, listen to. Every conversation I've ever had since I probably started working in the Middle East, recorded, right? Everybody who's ever talked to me, evaluated. Like it just, so this idea that somehow you're hiding from your government is insane. It's so
first off,
illogical.
real quick, if the NSA is listening, could you subscribe? That'd be sick if the NSA subscribed. If you guys are recording this, we're recording it too. We'll send you the full depth copy if you want.
I was just gonna say, like, I never understand those. I don't understand a lot of arguments. I think because I think too much into them. But the same thing that you're saying, like my parents used to work for the police department in Calgary, Alberta. My mom's 61 years old now. Like, she doesn't have any technology. Yep. She follows me from a burner Instagram account to watch the stuff I post. So, like, she's down on it. But, like, does everyone who doesn't want to get the vaccine in case they get tracked, do they all have a P.O. box somewhere with a fake name? Like, do you have a mailing address? Because they can find you.
I want the jackal. You better be like Bruce Willis, 7 passports, different identities, the fucking Mr. Potato Head mustache. You better be all in on this.
Yeah, because my mom was subpoenaed to go to court, so she just kept ignoring the phone calls because she's like, I don't have fucking time for this. So you know what they did? The RCMP just drove onto our lawn and walked in the house and grabbed my mom. That's what they did.
That's it.
And guess what? She doesn't even go on the internet. So everybody who was out there was like, oh, they're going to fucking track me with the vaccine. No, they're just going to find you because they found my 61-year-old mom sitting in the living room watching Great British Baking Show. Yeah. So relax.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I would throw the scent when I got back from the States and not put my unit number in my condo building. It's like, yeah, they sorted it out. Goddamn.
You got a mailing address.
Yeah, the COVID mall cop showed up at my place. It was like, fuck, you found me. How'd you do it? It's like, it's not that big of a building, sir. I was like, oh, okay.
It's not that big of a building. I think one of the big things that Biden's pushing forward this year, and I called this a year ago, those motherfuckers that thought they were getting free money. Biden is so you know where this is going. Biden is pushing through right now the hiring of 85,000 new IRS staff in the United States.
I love that.
There goes the business.
There it goes. Because you know what they're doing? They know that, you can't give $6 trillion and not get it back. Yeah. Right? So it's like everyone that thought that they were just going to, you have to pay tax on unemployment. Mm-hmm. I don't think people realize that.
That's why they're unemployed.
Yeah, right. You got your 1,600 or whatever it is, the 1,200 plus 600, whatever you're getting, they want it back. And all these people that have been late filing or not filing better get their shit together. Like the craziest thing I've heard this whole year, and I heard it a couple days ago, I think it was on Valuetainment. They were talking about this place in Jersey where people are paying over MSRP on cars.
What?
Like Yeah, people in this country have lost their mind. Buying, you know, buying houses, right? Buying houses unseen, right? Yeah. Like just like buying them up. You know, Montana, it's not a law, but that's where we're moving. So the real estate agents have had to put into place a law that you can't buy houses unseen anymore, because what's happening is all these people, and everyone thinks it's California, which it's a lot of, but it's actually Texas, Washington, Oregon, people that are just like people in Austin are leaving Austin if they were born and raised there because it's changed so much. But what they're doing,
Californians.
Yeah. Too many Californians, right?
Same thing.
And so same thing. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? You know, we got so many fucking millionaire hobos. Hobos.
Also California.
Hobos in town. Like, it's our favorite thing that we got right now is we got guys like rocking $180,000 Sprinter vans.
Yeah.
But they're millionaires and they're living out in the woods, right? So it doesn't make any sense. It just, pretty much the Germans just bomb Pearl Harbor right now. So at the when you think of everything that's going on right now, it's so ridiculous. So like Montana put this rule into place. And what the rule is that you have to physically have seen a house before you can buy it, because people were like, oh yeah, I'm going to buy that for $400,000. It's amazing. They're getting up there and it's a double wide trailer in the woods because there's no CCNRs in the state of Montana, right? So there's not even been a building inspection on a lot of these homes. They just built them, right? And so this entire mindset that we're seeing right now is so broken and destroyed because I don't know if they think they have more money than they do. They think that because they've been locked up for 12 months that they have to get out there and like make a massive change in their life to reset. Like, I don't know. But who spends more on a car than what the sticker price is? Like a Ford Escort. Like, I'm going over MSRP on my Ford Escort. It's like, oh, someone else wants it? I'll give you 500 more. Are you crazy? Just go down to Carfax and buy the same car off the lot that's a year old. You know, like it makes no sense. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. I mean, for me, the direction of this was I wanted to hear like some of the crazy shit. Like, you know, I wanted to hear the jewel thief story, and the crazier shit is just like walking out your front door.
Yeah, just reality.
Like here's a guy that's been around the world. Like you're like Aladdin with a barbell. It's like rather than a magic carpet, you just took a magic barbell across the world, however many fucking times. And but still now the craziest shit that we can talk about even a year later is just what's going on outside your front door.
All the enormous amount of homeless hobos living in the trees in California.
It's crazy.
Like, explain that to people. Explain the fact that Tahoe Memes just posted a video of the Memorial Day weekend and the brawl, right? I'm talking brawl, like a total Donnybrook along the Tahoe Lake that was like 300 or 400 deep. Like, what are they doing?
Which is
right. So
keep in mind that California is the 5th largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like it surpassed France 2 years ago.
It makes no sense. Like what is going on, right? That if I go out into Yosemite right now, it's so overwhelmed with tourists that you have to apply to a lotto on your computer to get a 3-day pass, and that is the only 3 days you get. And then you have to apply to this lotto again, because if not, they know that Yosemite would be so overrun with human population that it would ruin it, right? Like, where are these people coming from? Mammoth Lakes, they kept the ski hill open this winter, right? And, you know, they had to wear masks and all that bullshit. But with that being said, they downplayed the fact that it was one of the highest, if not the highest number of skiers, or what they refer to as winter guests, ever, right? So you're talking $200 a day for the pass. If you're not a skier and you don't have a season's pass, $200 a day for a pass, and another probably $600 just for the equipment, for rentals, and get the things going for the day. And we were seeing anywhere from 14 to 20,000 skiers a weekend, all pandemic. right? And they don't have anywhere to live. There's no hotels. Airbnbs are closed. So how are they all staying here, right? It's been the biggest racket in economic entertainment history. And now we're seeing the fallout of this, like ski industries in Southern California. Snow skiing industries have had the highest record sales in the history of their companies. They've sold more Nordica skis in Southern California than they ever have, right? And so people are like, yeah, but it's just going to roll back once they pull the trigger on the pandemic and shut it down. Really? You give people a taste of something, you think they're just going to roll it back? So I don't know where this ends up or goes, but I would take, sticking a guy on a barge in the Maldives that stole some diamonds over this. Like, sign me up for that, because that was actually fun.
Well, I mean, you don't know where it's going, but we know where you're going. Why the move to Montana? I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons why a guy in the woods from BC might move to Montana. But
move to Montana. So there's two big factors. Obviously, one, like if you look at Whitefish, Montana, which is no different than Los Angeles now, right? It's just been saturated with California migrants.
Hold on.
With that being,
Los Angeles? That's not a fucking term.
It is, dude. Los Angeles is southern Montana is now the fastest growing tech and internet city in America.
They have the internet there?
Bozeman, Montana is now Los Angeles. Yeah.
Fuck,
and how crazy, right? And so Whitefish now is the next. So Flathead Valley, which Whitefish is a part of, is actually growing faster now than southern Montana. And they're going to do to that area which they did to like Jackson Hole, Wyoming, right? They're going to put their house there, pay Montana taxes, and fuck off back to the beach, right? And so when you look at it that way, like Whitefish is only 2 hours from where I was born in British Columbia, right? So I can jump back and forth finally as a dual citizen. I can ski Fernie, hang out in southern British Columbia, be around my folks, be around that culture, which, I miss, right? Like those are good people. They're rural Canadians. Things move differently for them. And then I still get all the benefit of what I love to do in the United States, which, it's funny because it's kind of probably what you guys go through when you mention skating, right? Like I talk about skiing and people are like, oh yeah, I ski a little bit. It'd be like to you, oh yeah, I can skate. Meanwhile, you guys fucking play hockey your whole life, right? Like you're like, no, I don't think you understand. It's like when I say I ski, it's like for me, I can like lay him over off the top of a fucking cornice and it's freedom. I'm not like doing a recreation. Like for me, I can't remember learning to ski. So when I think of it in those terms, it's like it's a Canadian thing. It's like I grew up in a ski town. That's where I want to be. So Montana, Colorado, I think Montana is better. There's so much good skiing in Montana. So that's the big pull. Get me in a smaller ski town. Get me away from the chaos. They closed our airport here. It's never reopening. How about that for like Mammoth Lakes, right? They've had an airport forever. They're like, we got a flight a day from LA. Yeah, we don't need that anymore, right? So that's done. So that's another drawing factor. And, so when I look at that, then you have to, if you have this conversation, you have to have the political one. Right. And I know it's tough, because it makes people think like you're choosing sides. But Montana doesn't mess with your business all that much. Right. They, they're a state because of the ranching will often be like red and blue, or I guess they call that purple down here, where they'll have a conservative political party and they'll have a liberal governor, and then they'll switch back to a Republican governor, and they bounce through all that stuff. But because of that, they stay pretty balanced as a political system. When you have that, in theory, split system where you can have a Republican governor and a liberal, whatever, Senate or whatever they have, or vice versa, it kind of works, right? And so things don't ever get too crazy. Nothing ever sways too far right or too far left. Like everybody always gives Montana a hard time because they think it's like this super north, like separatist, radical bunch. But as much as you have that there, you also have a lot of people that they want to live close to Glacier National Park. They want to live at the base of a ski hill, and they want to water ski all summer. And that's why they're there. Now, is that changing? Yeah, probably. You know, I think it's going to be a lot like Southern Idaho. You're going to get people escaping the economic repression of poor governments. But I think that's just the nature of the United States. You know, does it change the politics of Montana like Austin City has changed? I don't know. One thing I know for sure, bums freeze in the winter, right? So, you know, like as much as you try to try to be political about it, that's the truth. You know, it's one of my favorite things is when I was working for Poliquin and I used to go to Toronto, minus 30, right? Minus 30 degrees, and you'd see a pile of laundry on the sidewalk. And you're like, why would someone leave a pile of laundry? And then a cat jumps out and an arm shoots straight up. And you're like, oh, someone lives in that pile of laundry. And then you realize it's sitting on the subway grate that's releasing the heat, right? Yeah, those people freeze to death in northern Montana. So we don't have that issue. And as much as people are like, oh, that's a harsh way to look at it, you know what? A fucking heroin addict drugged out of his head shitting in a street is not socially acceptable or okay. And if you think that that person should have some sort of special rights or considerations because, you know, riding the stake is more important than fucking being an integral part of society, yeah, you can fucking suck it, because I don't want to be around those people. And we're actually getting those people up in Mammoth. We're getting junkie mentality. You know what I saw this year? On the ski hill, $200 a day for people to do this expensive resort activity. I watched a guy shit on the ski hill.
Love it.
And, right? And no one, you know, another guy, 200 people lined up at the bottom of chair 2. He gets out of his $100,000 sport van, walks 6 feet across the snow and pisses in front of 200 people. Right? And no one has an issue with it. Why don't they have an issue with it? Because compared to the 50,000 people shitting on Main Street in Los Angeles, it's not that big of a deal.
You know what? If you didn't have a mask on, though, you'd have a real problem. You could have your
You'd have a
hog
real
out,
problem,
but I don't want
right?
to see your fucking nose, all right?
Yeah. You know, don't spread the fucking Rona, but please write your initials in the snow for us all to remember that you were here enjoying the weekend, right? And so when you look at that, you're like, yeah, it's not for me. I don't believe that it is a part of functional society, right? Now, if you want to go fucking hang a rat like 3 feet off into the trees where no one can see you, fucking go for it. I don't care, right? I did it my whole life. But if you're going to take a shit on a ski run because you're either too lazy or too oblivious to social norms and culture, yeah, I got an issue with that. You fucking hoodlum, you know?
Is there any chance we'll ever see you north of the border again?
You know what? I still have property in BC. Will I be there full time? I don't know. But man, as much as it's been difficult mentally to see how the government has dealt with this whole situation and the restrictions that you guys are under, and maybe you can speak to this, but I've been in the U.S. for 20 years, right? Over 20 years now, I guess, including my college time. And when I'm driving up 93 North or I jump on 95 South, when I get into British Columbia and literally it is uninhabited, there is a weight that just goes away. And I don't know how to explain it. Now, I could say, because in my heart of hearts, I know I'm Canadian, so blah, blah, blah. It's a little more than that. There's something to it that I cannot identify.
I get this one. So we're all from Windsor. Kyle's our producer. He's from Windsor as well. And I get it when you, even under the river. And even if you go for a day, you go to a Tigers game or something, under the river, there's a black line and 2 flags. And it identifies the dividing in the water between Canada and the U.S. And I feel like there was times when I was living in California, I would fly into Detroit and I would drive across the border. It's the quickest way to get to Windsor. And I would literally I would cry. I would literally cry once I crossed that line. So I think, kind of to your earlier question, it's more so that the Canadian identity isn't upheld and has never been upheld by the government. It was always upheld by Canadians, right? And whether local or abroad, I think the Canadian identity always resides in the individual, right? So much to your point earlier about Hobbes and sort of talking about the Leviathan over the last couple of weeks, that's what always gives me hope, is like when you just have conversations with Canadians, whether, like I said, local or abroad, and like, you know, you get into the elevator and everyone's got a mask on, and there's kind of a communal like, hey, you guys good? Like, oh, thank fucking God, man. Like, because I'll be the first guy into the pool because I'm not as polite as most Canadians are. But to see like everyone's just doing it for everyone else, which is, you know, for better or for worse, part of the Canadian identity, part of the Canadian experience. Right. But I feel like once the first stone is cast, everyone kind of like, I had an old lady get into the elevator at my building the other day, probably like mid to late 60s, overweight, every kind of risk factor under the sun. And she walked in with no mask. And there was a young kid who had a mask on. I didn't. She just like kind of barged in with her head down. She goes, fuck, you know what? And she actually said this, like, fuck, I'm so sick of these masks. And she apologized to the 25-year-old kid with a mask on. And he was like, he took it off. And we all just kind of sat there and enjoyed the a human moment. Yeah. And so I think that I still hold on to hope that like the Canadian identity still exists in those people. And once the first stone is cast, I think we'll find our way back.
Yeah, I think so too. And, you know, like a thing that I struggle with down here, and I've struggled with it for 20 years. And I can't remember if we talked about this or not, but on my mom's side of the family, at least 50% of all my like first cousins, aunts, etc., they're all Native Canadian. Right. So I grew up in Native Reserve culture. Obviously, when I was a kid, we used a different word for it, right? Like a more Americanized. But, you know, people understand what I'm talking about. Native Canadians are what a lot of people in the U.S. still refer to as Indians. Unfortunately, the term is not correct. But with that being said, it's kind of hard for me down here this year, like a lot of this incredible racial unrest, right, coming from Canada and growing up in Canada. To say that we don't have racism in Canada is a total lie, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have issues with it like every country on the planet. There's racism in Saudi Arabia amongst people that from a non-educated standpoint would think we're all of the same race. Mm-hmm. They're not, right? So there's issues everywhere we go. And the thing that is hard for me this year is hearing just this blatant like beating of a hammer that everything is racist, everything is this, everything is that. And what I miss about Canada is the nuance of that conversation, right? So growing up in Golden, British Columbia, right? We had place. Right? So here's an interesting stat about Golden that a lot of people would just not think about. It was, even though it was predominantly settled by the Swiss as a railroad town into the heart of the Rocky Mountains or a pass through the Rocky Mountains, it has the oldest Sikh temple in North America. And you're like, well, how does that even make sense? Like, how could the Indo-Canadian culture settle in Golden, British Columbia before everywhere else in North America, right? And it's because they came over to work and do these different jobs that existed in the early 1800s. So by default, growing up in Canada, I never, even if kids wanted to fight with each other and draw out your most obvious differences as a way to elicit conflict, right, which humans always do, and it is what it is. So even though you had that conflict in my town amongst kids getting into fights and, you know, calling out one kid for this or calling out one kid for that, you know, or me being often mistaken as Polish descent, getting attacked because, you know, I was a dumb Polak, right? And so you hear that in Canada all the time. But within that nuance, you also grow up, even in the smallest towns in Canada, incredibly multicultural. Incredibly multicultural. Even if people don't want to have that conversation right now because everyone's angry and on social media. When I look back to my childhood, I was fortunate to grow up with probably 4 different languages in a little logging town in British Columbia. Like, how does that even make sense based on what we're seeing projected by social media? Well, it's because Canada has this cultural nuance that is missing, in my opinion, in a lot of places worldwide. Like, I've been all over the world and not seen that true melting pot that we used to get taught in elementary school. And so for me, that's a part of Canada that I miss. Like, I miss the fact that when I go back to Canada, you don't see this, like, and I think it might be getting worse. You guys could speak to it but I think social media is making it a little bit worse. But I used to be able to go home and hang out with a group of friends, or go out to the bar, or we go out and do whatever. And you look around, you don't think about cultural difference in your group. But if I was to take a snapshot of my drinking group from Calgary back in the late 90s, you're looking, 4 or 5 different races?
Well,
right?
And the thing too, and I still think it's very similar, at least it was when I was growing up, was it's one thing to speak about the cultural cross-section of a group of people that get along and it not be a talking point. I think the beauty of growing up in Canada is to see a cultural cross-section of people that don't get along and it not be a talking point. Lundy, right. I remember Julian Bastien and Travis Hall went fisticuffs behind the Red Lobster on Tecumseh Road, and at no point did Travis think Julian was fighting him because he was black. At no point was Julian fighting Travis because he was black. At no point did we think Travis was fighting Julian because he was white, and at no point did Julian think Travis was fighting him because he was white. Right? So even in our 100%. Disagreement, it's never anything that comes up. It's like, Julian was white and he was being an asshole, but Julian was getting his ass kicked because he was an asshole. Right? It had nothing. Yep. It never had anything to do with race. Because I think it's easy to look around countries and see, this Cheers multicultural moment where you have like the Sears magazine catalog diversity layout of people all laughing and all that. And that's all well and good, but I think on the flip side of that, one thing that might be more uniquely Canadian is when the disagreements happen and there is a cross-section, it's as moot of a point as when the agreements and the camaraderie is there. It's just something that is, because you grow up with it, and even in a small town like Golden, having that kind of immersion of cultures in there, it's something that's just, it's never brought up. It's never brought up in the good or the bad, which I think it's really more the bad when things are going bad, that it's just like, it's just, I don't know, it's just a disagreement not predicated on race or culture.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, the best hockey player we had coming out of our high school at my generation was a guy named Jorah Dami, right? Jorah was like his cousins were all fucking athletic dudes, right? Like Mange was the guy that introduced me to the weight room in a lot of regards. He was like a 405 bench with like Mange was like that dude, small town Canada, mustache, parted his hair in the middle back then. But Mange always wore a sweatshirt, probably ripped the collar off somehow, got it stuck on something. So he had no collars on his sweatshirt, sleeves, sweatpants. We're talking like 24-inch waist, 180-pound dude, benching 405. Right? And so you got small town BC. This guy's coming in with Dave Gwindon, who is also in that same category. And these guys are just fucking slinging iron. And you're 14, 15 years old. And Mange was obviously related to Jorah, who went on to be a phenomenal hockey player, but he was much bigger. He's like 6'1", 6'2", like 210-ish, It's like when you grow up around those guys in a weight room or an athletic setting, you're seeing it in professional sports, when that's your core group of social connection and the weight room becomes that framework, there's no difference in who's in that room. Like at 14, looking at like an in his mid-20s Mange, I mean, that's my idol. Like, how do I become like this guy? He's got 4 fucking stacks on this bar. How do I become Mange? Like, what do I need to do to get into his training group, right? And when you finally get the nod is you're not training at the local gym. You're going up to the Golden Rim Motor Inn, literally from the song that Hip wrote, because that was his family's business, and he had a weight room in his house, and you got to train with that select group of like really hardcore, dedicated iron guys. And it's like, I've said it a million times. I talk about it at Summer Strong. You want to like close that cultural divide, make your kids play sports. Make them play sports, get them interacted culturally with people they need to depend on, as well as compete with to get better, and make it as diverse of that group as possible, and the world is a better fucking place.
It's a great equalizer.
Mm-hmm. It is, man. And I got to play college sports, and I got to coach college sports. It's It is the biggest gift that I've now as a guy in his 40s watching the social media anarchy that we're watching in this country. The biggest gift I was ever given was the ability to play sports with an incredibly diverse group of humans that I didn't always get along with, or, I was maybe in love with, right? Like maybe it was a chick that in college that I had a thing for, but it is what it is. And what that teaches you is that because you're in this thing together, this thing that's greater than everything around you, even if it's a short-lived moment, which is sports typically, it completely breaks down the boundaries that are formulated psychologically, in my opinion, that make people weak, right? Like separatism and racism is weakness at its most fundamental level. It is a fear of something that is not you or not something in which I believe you understand. So to be fearful of something is a weakness of something. And when I look at that, it's like you want to make sure that your kids are well established and adapted, even if they're not going to be the next Gretzky. Put them into sports young and just let them work that shit out. And what you'll find is over time, they will become solidified, balanced adults, unless you, as the adult, integrate some sort of broken psychology into them that overrides that.
Yeah, I mean, growing up playing hockey it's a microcosm, right? It's a microcosm of time and space. But like you said, you have a compressed season. It's like you could almost look at that as like a lifespan, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a large in part to why I chose like the vocation that I did, or like the job that I did, was I wasn't great at communicating, but you can use reps and sets to kind of communicate, right? And that's like the nice part about the gym is having clients or having athletes you work with. It's like that's how I can show you that I care by the effort I put into the program, to the coaching interaction, and that's like kind of our method of communication, because we hold that struggle to such a high value, because we can parallel it outside of the gym and how you're going to communicate in other avenues, in other arenas. So yeah, it's definitely something that, I remember being in Windsor Arena, one side of the bench, my mom had to bait me with a chocolate bar to get me to skate. She'd go down to the bench and then go and I'm like, being the fat kid at heart that I was and still am, like, I'll skate for an aero bar, fucking rights I will. So and then I just bawling my eyes out, the fat kid chasing the chocolate bar, and like now it's, you can still get me to do a lot for a chocolate bar, but it's I think it's like you said, at the fundamental level, what we're seeing is fear. It's a fear response. It's a wantingness to self-preserve, but not really having the strategies to know how to cope with that fear. So interesting times to say the least, but it is cool to be able to look a little deeper under the surface of like what we think might be driving some of the behaviors we're seeing at scale. And you, I think, being in what I would say in the States, probably one of the weirder microcosms in watching your story over the last couple of years, and to watch you immersed in it. Not to draw too much entertainment out of your suffering, but it has been some of the Derek Woodske Instagram stories have been pretty comical when he unloads a clip with the John Wick in the driveway, just going like, I had a rough day at the grocery store, some guy fucking walked a perimeter around me, so I'm going to unload over the door frame of the Cherokee or whatever the fuck.
How crazy though, right? Like here we are in California, right, which gets all the reputation. I literally can drive 3 minutes from my house, and so the amount of people. Now, we can get into the fact that there ain't fucking a bullet to buy in this country right now because they got them sitting next to their 10 piles of toilet paper thinking that the world's coming to an end. Basically, people think they're going to shit themselves to death in a gunfight. That's basically what's happening right now in the United States, right? And so it's the psychology of it is ridiculous. But I can go out to the shooting range. It's full every day. Middle of nowhere, there's campers, RVs, people like... I just stopped shooting because there's so many people up there just like blasting away, I guess like, that 2A right, but holy smokes, man, it's not the same. And, it's been a strange microcosm year. It's, I wish there was a way to describe it other than it's been the weirdest, like false reality I could have ever experienced. Perfect example. And I don't know when we'll close up this conversation, but I'll leave you with this story if we do right here. Last week, I didn't have my mask on walking into a Rite Aid, and I saw a girlfriend and boyfriend situation coming out. Maybe they're married, maybe they're not. I don't know. Totally masked up. And as I'm approaching across the parking lot, I'm maybe 15 feet away. And he grabs her and, like, in a masculine protective embrace,
Chivalry.
pulls her slightly to the right.
Love it.
Right? And I, like, look and I make eye contact with him. He looks away. She looks away. And the exact words that she said was, exactly like that guy. So I represented something very wrong to them. Right? Meanwhile, just a dude trying to buy some deodorant, you know, like
I'd test his chivalry. I'd jump him.
right.
I'd be like, all right,
Okay,
you think you're a hero? You think you're gonna, you're dodging it, you're jumping in front of the imaginary bullet? Let's dance.
So my Canadian psychology, I'm glad you said that, ran this exact scenario, because I remember a buddy of mine 15 years ago that, you know, for different reasons, was kind of dressed a little rough. You know, he'd probably come in from working, you know, like a blue collar, callous job. It was walking towards a hotel, right? And a guy and a girl, no masks, obviously 15 years ago in Canada, they come out and she makes the comment, look at that guy, right? Because it was an attack on his self-worth because of how he was dressed. His exact words were, I will kick your dude's fucking ass. That's what he said, right? And what happened in that scenario? Dude turns to chick and is like, what are you doing?
Amazing.
You just threw me under the fucking bus, right? And it's that same broken mindset, like, that mask ain't protecting your fucking teeth. It's not. And we're seeing that in California all over the place. Okay, dude, you've been to Mammoth Lakes. Can you imagine, and this is a true story, a year ago, someone brandishing a handgun in the fucking pickle aisle over a mask?
You know what it reminds me of? That reminds me of the Big Lebowski, where he pulls the Beretta on the lanes.
Yeah.
Over the line!
Okay, over the line, Big Lebowski. Big Lebowski, do you know who John Milius is?
Yeah.
Of course.
One of the greatest directors of all time, writers.
Animal House,
wrote Apocalypse Now. So Milius was the writer for Apocalypse Now. Red Dawn, wrote and directed Conan. Wrote the dialogue for Sean Connery and Hunt for Red October. Came through USC Film School with George Lucas, and then George Lucas, and Spielberg were like the three horsemen of the Hollywood apocalypse back then, right? And there was another guy, I can't remember. So John Milius kind of got outed from Hollywood, even though he literally has written or directed every major movie that would have affected us as kids. Every single one of them. So Milius, they did a documentary on him, and it's worth checking out on Prime, and it goes through his life story. John Goodman's character in The Big Lebowski is a portrayal visually, and from what I understand, personality-wise, of John Milius, which one of the greatest directors ever and writers ever in history. When he wrote in the movie Jaws, when he's given the monologue about the ship sinking and the sharks coming and everyone dying.
Yeah.
John Milius wrote that over the phone talking to Spielberg because they needed a couple paragraphs of monologue.
That's hilarious.
That's his brain, that's the guy, right? Yeah. So Big Lebowski, that's exactly it. And it's like, there's no accountability. A mask, sunglasses, and a hat right now is basically bulletproof armor in the state of California.
And this people
Yeah.
feel
And this-
real
with the
safe
camera on
behind this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because
Yeah.
like one of my favorite in that scene where Goodman's putting the Beretta back in the bowling bag is he just keeps repeating to himself, "There are rules, Smokey.
Yeah.
There are rules." And it's sort of like, I think that's what we're missing, right? Rules should have consequences, right? But once we can topple this rule with like, wait a minute, I am covering my face with a conceal and carry. This rule is broken. All rules are broken, right? So I think, but I mean, I don't know. We've been talking obviously a lot about this since I've been back, and just being immersed in a country where where a Canadian flag, get this, and this might break your heart as a Canadian. I went to Dollarama the other day, and behind the non-essential tape that you cannot buy from this 4-foot section was a Canadian flag.
Dude, it makes you think they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Patriotism, non-essential.
Patriotism is non-essential. Last year in California, in our town, they canceled 4th of July. But yet they left all these other things open where just as many people would potentially gather. You know, so it's like the idea that this isn't an attack on some level our like personal freedoms in the West is asinine, because we're seeing it over and over and over. Like, I had a buddy up in Saskatoon sends me a DM like 4 months ago. He went in and the same thing. It was like essentials, non-essentials. I guess it would be, 4 months ago. Christmas lights, 5 months ago. They fucking escorted him out of Canadian Tire. Like, they escorted him out for trying to buy Christmas lights. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like buying Christmas lights doesn't spread COVID. You don't get the fucking Rona from red and blue twinkly bulbs. It just doesn't exist. But yet that's their mentality. But he could have bought, I don't know, 24 beers, right? Like, no big deal.
Yeah, man.
Get shit-faced.
We're going to have to make this an annual thing. And I wonder how many years it'll take for us to get to the fucking jewel thief story. Because last year when we had the conversation, and I got to go find and check that text message thread to see if my UFO videos are still there from that text message thread. But I was like, certainly next year we'll get to it. And it is almost a year to the day.
Almost a year.
Hopefully this is the craziest conversation we have, man. I just want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much, Derek.
Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
It's always great to step outside the reps and the sets. And as much as I do follow you for your Rain Man like explanations of your home sandbag workouts and assault bike sprints, and I mean that, knowing myself to be often referred to as Rain Man. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. But it's always great to see the other side of the barbell, man. So hopefully you stay sane, stay safe on the travels, stay in touch as well. And hopefully next year or sometime soon we'll be able to do this in person.
I agree 100%. It's always a pleasure. It's nice to actually talk to a couple people that have faces.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for your time, man. We appreciate you.
Appreciate it greatly.
See you, Ross.
Thank you. See you.